The College Baseball Experience on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Play their fantasy pick'em for a chance to win 100x in NBA, MLB, MMA, NHL, golf, and more. Sign up today using promo code TCSGPN to get a 100% deposit match. Plus, the NFL draft is coming up, and Old Fashioned Football is giving away some autographed NFL merchandise. Head over to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/OFF contest. That's OFF contest to enter today. Yes. And it is showtime here on the College Baseball Experience. What's going on, everybody? My name is Noah Bieniek, aka 77. You can follow me on Twitter, NoahB77 _ there. And also our podcast is on Twitter at TC on SGPN. We have a great show in store for you today. Honestly, my guest today was Jake McKeever of College Baseball Central. And honestly, we talked way longer than I thought we were. So honestly, the entire interview is going to be the episode. It was great. At some points of it, I was like absolutely stunned that he was going 6, 7, 8 guys deep on rosters and still giving out great analysis on some of those guys. That's something that I just cannot match. My knowledge is more on teams, and when I'm handicapping teams rather than players. And I thought this episode was outstanding because you got the point of view from somebody that actually covers college baseball year round. They go way deeper over there at College Baseball Central than I personally do. And this is a perfect episode for anybody that is kind of just a casual sports bettor going in season to season. I mean, we had college basketball season end with the NCAA tournament, March Madness, Final Four, UConn winning the national championship. Then a casual bettor would have went right into Masters weekend and had some money on that. And now you're going to disperse between NHL playoffs starting up, NBA playoffs starting up. MLB is always going to be there, but college baseball has really blown up since COVID, and the gambling market has been, in my opinion, a huge reason for that. And with the College Baseball Experience, that was an easy thing for us to kind of initially spearhead the gambling coverage in college baseball. Jake and I were talking literally over 2 hours prior to the show and during the show. And I was talking to him about it, when we both kind of got into the college baseball content space, there really weren't that many people doing anything. And they have done a great job at being one of the top info providers out there for college baseball. But with us, with the college experience, with SGPN, we realized that nobody was out there doing any betting content. So that was an easy thing for us to we can slide in. We're not stepping on anybody's toes. They do an amazing job with what they do. We do an amazing job kind of leading the whole pioneering college baseball gambling thing here with the College Baseball Experience. And anytime I'm able to get anybody like that, I think it is an outstanding episode. And we had that once again here with Jake. So yes, if you're a casual bettor jumping into the middle of the college baseball season, going to ride it out through the postseason, we sprinkled in some predictions on some teams that usually are good. They have program standards that they're currently not meeting during the season, or for the teams that were expected to be really, really good this year and just have not lived up to preseason expectations. We go in depth on quite a few of those teams. And we talk about, how he got into covering college baseball, his experience at Omaha last year. He was there for the great College World Series that we had. And hopefully we get an even better one this year, although it's going to be hard to top. So yeah, he was a great guest. And yeah, it's going to be useful info for anybody looking to bet college baseball throughout the end of the season here. One thing that I wanted to mention real quick, we have not done extremely I have not done an extremely well job at, kind of, I hate this part of it, but promoting our show, asking for reviews. So this is me doing it right now. On Spotify, you can drop 5 stars by reviewing the show. The 5 stars really helps the Spotify algorithms and helps us push out the college baseball show more. And also on Apple, 5-star review, and you can actually type up a little 2-sentence, 3-sentence review, whatever you want to do. Screenshot your review that you submit, then tag me on Twitter. I'm going to do a giveaway here. So recently I ordered some seeds from Chinook Seedery. They do a great job. I love their seeds. I hadn't really heard of Chinook until the middle of last year. I purchased some, and this is not an advertisement. Legitimately, I love their seeds because it does not make my mouth raw. I can eat them in bulk. I've told this story many times, but me playing college ball myself, I was a bench warmer. All I would do was freaking eat seeds, and my mouth was so raw. So if I even thought of having a social life outside, any girl, I would have felt bad. I've never experienced it, but would have felt bad with the raw mouth. But anyways, getting sidetracked here. I'm going to be giving away some seeds. You can hear them through the microphone. I'm showing them on YouTube. I forget our stream link, but the College Baseball Experience on YouTube. I mean, we got lemon pepper seeds, which is the Bobby Witt Jr. seeds. That's their, themed or their showcase seed, or I forget what you call it. I got Parmesan pepper in front of me. I got jalapeno ranch. I personally like their original and smokehouse barbecue. I ordered a box of those, half and half it was supposed to be, and I got sent an entire box full of their variety pack. So they're actually sending me another box of the ones that I wanted, but I have now all of these seeds that I'm not going to eat. But I can fully get behind that. If you eat seeds in bulk, your mouth will just not get raw by eating Chinook seeds. So I want to give them away. So leave a review, take a screenshot when you submit the review, then go over to Twitter, at me on Twitter, NoahB77_, and I mean, I'll give away some of these seeds. Yeah, and that does it for that. Before we get into the Jake McKeever, cut, I want to talk to you about, the NFL draft, which is coming up. Old Fashioned Football, which is a show in SGPN. Justin Mark and his wife Miranda do a great job on it. It's a fantasy football show like you've never heard before. They do a bunch of whiskey content and a bunch of fantasy football content, and it's husband and wife. They do great stuff. They're giving away some autographed merchandise to celebrate the NFL draft. So Jackson Smith and Jigba, Travis Etienne, J.K. Dobbins, Frank Gore, and many more. Old Fashioned Football. They're giving away a ton of merchandise. Head over to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/OFF contest. Again, Old Fashioned Football. The abbreviation is OFF contest after sportsgamblingpodcast.com. We're also brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, which is the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry currently. You can pick whether your favorite players will go higher or lower than their stat total for this week's game for a chance to win big. So you can win up to 100 times your money in any single night. Personally, I was writing articles for the college basketball season from December to February every single night. I had great success doing it. I've heard rumors that college baseball could be in the works here for Underdog Fantasy, but then again, all the college props, we have not heard tremendous things with the government wise. Underdog Fantasy has been doing a ton of work to try not to fall under all of that category. But if you sign up today with Underdog Fantasy, use our promo code TCESGPN, and you can get your first deposit doubled up to $100, as well as an instant pick'em special. Visit underdogfantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with my promo code, our promo code, this show's promo code, TCE SGPN to get your first deposit bonus doubled up to $100, as well as an instant pick'em special. You must be 18 or older and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. And if you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-522-4700 or visit www.mpcgambling.org. Now let's get into this amazing part of the show with Jake McKeever of College Baseball Central. All right, I want to welcome a very special guest on today's episode of the College Baseball Experience. It's College Baseball Central's Jake McKeever, who covers this great sport all season long. Jake McKeever, you're now on the College Baseball Experience. How is it going, one? And two, I ask this as the first question to every new guest that comes onto the show. What made you kind of fall in love with college baseball? What made you want to cover college baseball? How did you land with College Baseball Central?
Well, first off, Noah, thanks for having me. Our kind of main boss is also named Noah, so it's going to be a little bit kind of weird because we're kind of on the same level here. But how I kind of got into college baseball was, I grew up going to those A&M games. There was just a ton of guys that I really, really enjoyed watching, like Mitch Now, Cole Langford, that really just kind of made me fall in love with the game. Just the passion of it. Everybody's always kind of running out ground balls. And then how I got connected with Noah was he just put out like a tweet about, hey, we're looking for writers this year. So I DM'd him. There wasn't any story requirement or anything like that. I guess we just always had good baseball talks during the College World Series. That's how me and Noah got hooked up with everything. And then 3 years later, we're still going strong.
That's awesome. One other icebreaker, I guess, to get the listeners kind of to know you a little bit. I know you were at last year's College World Series, which that field of teams included a bunch of stud player after stud player. What was your experience covering that event? What was the experience like? Is there a game or a memory that kind of sticks out to you most?
Yeah, I should say that I had not necessarily low expectations, but the year before, A&M and Texas had played. Ole Miss and Arkansas had really kind of played and sold the place out. So I was really looking forward to it. But again, just the amount of storylines that we had in that College World Series, TCU with the whole IHOP thing, LSU not being the number one team rolling through. Wake was just star-studded. Florida was really good. Oral Roberts was kind of that underrated team. There was just so many storylines. And I think the one memory that really kind of stands out to me is when Florida played Oral Roberts, and Oral Roberts kept loading the bases and Florida just kept getting out of it. And then there was that whole weird sequence with O'Sullivan where he had too many mound visits, and Cags like jogged down to the bullpen, but they brought in somebody else. Like, it was just one of the wildest games I've ever seen. And the stakes were super, super high with it. That one or the Skeens Rhett Lauder game, because there was a ton of hype behind it.
Yeah.
And it's one of the few times I think in any sport where it's really kind of lived up to the hype. So those two games, the one that really, really stood out to me.
Yeah, I feel like if I were to ask that to a lot of people that were there, they would respond with the Skeens and Lauder game. But that, I mean, just as a kind of a casual Florida fan, that Oral Roberts, the six, where Sully wears the six shirt to the next,
I can count to six. That was pretty funny. He went and he actually went and printed that like a mall. He told us that the next day. It was really funny. It was so tight because Kevin O'Sullivan's such a muscular guy. I just remember it being such a tight shirt.
Yeah, I mean that's funny too. Like that you are able to bring that up, because what I remembered from you is during the media availability prior to the College World Series even starting with all 8 teams, you were there kind of early, and I remember a couple of teams being, the smaller, I guess, tentative teams. The one that stuck out to me the most was Stanford, and how there was kind of very few people asking questions. So you were able to, get a little bit deeper into your notebook per se. One of the final questions you asked to Quinn Matthews was about his purple glove. And I thought that was hilarious. I was able to clip that, put it out on social. It did pretty well. I think I tagged you on it too, but like, I felt like, just overall, I think we've talked about it prior, but like I really respect your work with CBC. You guys go deep into the weeds in the preseason, but that was the one thing that I remembered from you and Omaha. And I just, what led you to even think of asking him about the glove choice?
I mean, that one's always tough because you don't want to ask like casual kind of cornball questions, but It was just something that I like when I was watching them, because I was at the TCU Super Regional, so I was watching that one on TV. That really just kind of stood out to me because usually pitchers kind of have black gloves, and I remember I did a
Yeah.
little bit of research where I went and found pictures from like years prior, and he had like I think a brown glove and then a black glove. So I was actually really curious about it, and he gave me just an awesome answer. Sometimes you kind of ask those like cornball questions, and people are like, oh, it really doesn't affect me, but Quinn gave it. He's like, yeah, I just, it was my last time to kind of do a crazy one. I felt like everything was kind of, talking about his arm and his arm health. And it was so played out that I kind of wanted to just ask another question. And yeah, there was, I think, just a San Francisco writer was there, but no school writers or anything were there. And I remember too, Wake was kind of another similar thing where it was just me and Essex there, who, if you don't follow him, he gives great Wake insight. He writes for a 247 affiliate.
Yeah.
So I mean, we got to have private interviews with those guys, and it was truly awesome to kind of see them kind of play in. Unfortunately, Stanford kind of went home early, but again, we had that memory there.
Yeah. Easy transition into today's topic. So I'll preface this by saying, for the bettors that kind of jump from sport to sport throughout the year, you're trying to catch up to speed in college baseball after college basketball season ends, after the Masters. This is going to be a great episode for you. Personally, I'm titling this episode like the mid-season crisis, because Jake and I have handpicked a few teams that have either struggled mightily compared to preseason expectations or just program standards not quite living up to them so far. Instead of the typical statements of like, oh, this team has talent, they're eventually going to turn it around at some point this season statements, I told Jake, let's go into a little bit of detail. We don't have to give a ton, but like just why some of these slow starts have happened. And, as a consumer of a lot of college baseball content, especially Jake's at College Baseball Central, I know he's built a little bit of a reputation on not being afraid to throw out a little bit of a hot take or two here and there. So after we talk about each team, we'll both give a prediction on just whether or not the team will be able to turn something around. So like for some of them, whether it's make the NCAA tournament, for some of them, it's be a 1 seed, a top 16 seed in the NCAA tournament. So Jake, here's where that CWS segue comes into play. I mean, both of last year's finalists from the championship game, but also all 4 of the remaining 4 teams from last year, have kind of struggled and not lived up to expectations. Let's start with the 2 finalists, LSU, Florida. Take your pick, whichever team you want to hit on first. Kind of why have the slow starts happened for the Tigers and Gators?
I mean, LSU, I guess I'll start with them because it's a little bit easier, in my opinion. They were still kind of getting some good gambling odds there early to go back to Omaha. It turns out it's really hard to replace guys who go number 1 and number 2 in drafts. I know that's kind of shocking to people. LSU had a lot of pitching issues last year. I felt like Paul Skeens kind of masked. He was a guy who would throw 7, 8, 9 innings. He was a true workhorse in every sense of the word, and they really only needed a guy to kind of come in after him. They got Luke Holman out of the portal from Alabama. He's kind of been that Skeens role, but again, I think he's kind of more of a prototypical, not MLB 1-1 type arm, where his best is going to throw you 7, 1, 2 runs, those kind of stuff. But again, I think the issue with LSU this year is they had a ton of guys that started early for him last year, like the Jared Joneses, Paxton Klings, Brady Neals, that got benched later in the season for guys who really kind of came around again. The Braden Joe Bears, Hayden Travinski's, those kind of guys. And that now when, they don't have the Joe Bears, the Dugosses, those kind of glue guys to come in, they really kind of struggle at the plate. And outside of Tommy White, I don't really think it's an intimidating lineup. Travinski, he's good for about 1 home run, but he's more likely to go 1 for 7 with that 1 home run than necessarily pepper you to death. Brady Neal has really struggled. Paxton Kling finds himself in and out of the lineup. They've had to count on, guys like Milam, who, he's still a freshman and he has freshman moments, but that's really kind of been the issue with LSU this year is, their hitting hasn't been as good as it was last year in the A. The pitching really kind of puts Jay in an uncomfortable spot because it's having to get stressed out and used a lot more. And, there's a lot of guys that have been really, really up and down, and lately they've just been down, and it's been a lot of their older guys, unfortunately, for them. A lot of the younger guys, I think, are kind of starting to step up and take bigger roles.
to branch off a few, so maybe the entire team might concern us a little bit, because for me, I really circled, the pitching outside of Holman and Jump, because I expected the Tigers to take a step back offensively. Like, yes, Dylan Cruz and a lot of those super seniors, that was kind of to be expected. However, I was somewhat a believer in the depth of the pitching staff this year, because last year there was a couple of injuries that really derailed it in the middle of the year. The big disappointment to me personally has been Thatcher Hurd, who played a big role in that College World Series title run last year.
I will say this about Thatcher Hurd that a lot of LSU people of forget, is he really did struggle in that kind of April-May window and became lights out down the stretch. So we're just kind of seeing what we saw in the middle of the year from Thatcher Hurd, which again, the glass half empty kind of guy was like, yeah, Thatcher Hurd's going to have that again. And a lot of the LSU fans were kind of on the other side of, well, he did so good in Omaha. So
yeah, and
I didn't expect him to be as bad as he is. Like, he's not even in the rotation.
No. And so, he struggled in the regular season, stepped it up in the postseason, and it's kind of out of nowhere, in my opinion. And that was one reason why I was kind of not really on LSU last year. And maybe it even fooled Jay Johnson too, because Hurd was the opening day starter. It wasn't even Holman. But
they got him out really fast, though. In 3 weeks in, he was the Sunday guy in Houston. They got him out really fast.
The Friday Texas game, the third weekend, yes, he was not starting that. Yeah. It was Holman. But since first pitch, he has not looked like the guy that we saw during that title run. Like 6.59 ERA, he's currently at, walking 4.5 batters per 9. And the bullpen
again, I think Nate Yeskie is a really, really talented pitching coach, but he came over from A&M last year, who shattered pitching records. LSU's kind of having similar issues too as well. So I don't know if it's a philosophical thing where I think Nate Yeskie likes people to kind of work side to side, and it's really kind of gotten a lot of the pitchers' heads. But that's the part that I think is really going to have to get figured out for him, is just that pitching staff.
Because
they have a seriously uphill battle, though, to get into the tournament. They are quickly running out of time.
100%. Real quick. So, like, the bullpen on the weekends right now, 6.75 ERA. They lost Riley Cooper, who was a big arm for them out of the pen last year, but they still returned Nate Ackenhausen, Gavin Guidry, Javen Coleman, who were good bullpen arms last year, and they've combined for 57 innings and a 5.84 ERA. So now let's get to the point of the prediction. You mentioned it a little bit of kind of what they have next. LSU's results over the next 2 series are going to show me a lot, because they go to Como to play Missouri and they host Auburn. Those 2 teams are in the bottom 4 of the SEC, but they're not guarantees, because you know who else is in the bottom 4 of the SEC?
LSU.
It's LSU. So
Missouri's one more series than LSU too as well. I think they take care of business against Missouri, but Auburn is a really bad matchup for LSU. They love to hit the ball around the yard, and they don't have a ton of pitching. The pitching that they do have, like Chase Allships, is a high fastball guy who loves to pound the zone. So when you get somebody like Tennessee who's free swinging, it's kind of creates a little bit of an issue. But that's going to be the one that I think is really tough. But again, at the end of the day, I mean, LSU's run a gauntlet these last few series. Like, it's been a tough sledding. But again, that's just life in the SEC. Like, Mississippi State was one that you probably thought they should have stolen looking back. But again, they're going to have to win every series here, because I think the magic number is 10 or 11 SEC wins that secures you in. I don't think LSU's out of conference RPI is going to be the one that kind of gets them in. I think that the only school that would kind of be the outlier anomaly would be Auburn, just because, they went and played a really kind of tough out of conference schedule. But LSU's going to have to earn their way back in.
Yeah, you're talking about some of the resume numbers here. They're 22-15 overall, 3-12 in the SEC. They're 6th in the SEC West, 13th out of 14 overall. Right now, they're currently missing Hoover. I think they get 2 series that are winnable here. But then again, like you were talking about the SEC gauntlet, you've got to win your home series. Like Florida, as we look currently, not great. They hosted Florida early in the season. They lose that series. They also had Vandy up against the ropes, who were learning that they kind of are struggling on the road here, and also just against teams with winning records. They're 1-5 against teams with a winning record in the SEC currently, and they weren't able to win that series either. So For me,
they get A&M after Auburn,
yeah.
Bama at Bama. Bama is really good at home. That's another one where it's like it's kind of like South Carolina. Like if they were playing on the road, you'd feel really good about them coming to Alex Box. But Bama's turning to really, and then Ole Miss. That might be a Bianco job
Yeah,
series where he always seems to just do enough to keep his job. They won that state this weekend. That's going to be a tough one. That one might be a Hoover elimination game.
That was his first series win against State in what? It's 8 years. 2015 was the last one.
15 was the last one.
Yeah.
That makes sense because they didn't win one when I was at Mississippi State.
So yeah, I am kind of punting LSU to the curb too. They might. I think they'll get into Hoover. I'll say they'll probably be I think they finish as the 10th through the 12th seed in the SEC, and they'll have to win some games in Hoover in order to make the NCAA tournament. That's my prediction there.
Yeah, I don't know. The committee kind of does these things where like blue bloods not necessarily get a pass, but we've seen it with Texas in the past, Miami. I forget who got in last year who really shouldn't have been. Arizona. I think LSU kind of is in that tier.
Yeah.
That they
Especially
have a better shot at
national champions. That's a story too. You're speaking right up my co-host Colby's alley here. He'll pick apart this resume because they didn't schedule tough and non-con either.
Xavier on paper was supposed to be a good series. Texas is Texas State. Texas. Yeah. That's gonna be the one.
Aging like milk.
Yeah, it's going to be the one where they're going to get a little bit more of a pass than somebody like Kentucky would be.
Yeah.
Because remember 2 years ago, Kentucky was kind of in a very similar spot. They got hot really late. They beat Tennessee, who was number 1 in the nation.
That's right.
And they got left out. So there is a precedent for it. But I think furthermore, even if they get into the NCAA tournament, they're really not a team that strikes fear into people that they play. They think don't have somebody to protect Tommy White at the end of the day.
I think you'd only fear a Holman Aiden in game, right?
Yeah. And again, it's a regional. You get even if you get that, you can come back through, or you might not even face him. But again, I think that's the one that they really need to kind of.
There would be against 2 seed too, or 3 seed. So
they really need to have somebody outside of Tommy White step up, and it's not Travinsky because he's a 5th-year senior. He's going to hit 280, 290, give you a home run a weekend. They need somebody like Milam, like Neal, like Jared Jones, Michael Braswell too, to some extent. I know he's kind of up in the leadoff spot, but Jay is trying everything with this LSU team. Like it's not Jay Johnson.
There's a new story coming out every week of him trying desperately something.
He's moved Holman to be the number 2 when he's obviously the ace.
Trying to play the matchups.
He's playing the matchups. He's the lineup. He's moved Jared Jones to the leadoff. He's moved Tommy White to the leadoff. He's, holding on for dear life. And credit to Jay Johnson for kind of thinking outside the box because there's only so much you can do with. Jared Jones is a high power, low contact guy. Tommy White, his chase rate's a little bit high, but he has good bat for all skills. But again, he's not a leadoff fast guy. Brady Neal has really struggled in SEC play. Paxton Kling's glove is great, but again, I think he's hitting under 200, and they really don't hit well against lefties either. Tommy doesn't really hit well against lefties. So there's a lot to not like about this LSU team.
And you detailed it a little bit, but specifically that Arkansas weekend, he goes TBA on Friday, then Holman jump Saturday, Sunday, or it might have been a Thursday series. Either way,
it was a Thursday, Saturday.
Yeah,
because that was his excuse, was that he didn't want to get Holman off, but he already had messed up his rest, so it's a little bit kind of weird.
And then
they went with the bullpen game, but they didn't use Thatcher Hurd or.
I think Thatcher came in at the end because they had the shot to win it, so they had a shot to win it the bullpen game. Or actually,
they've been using Griffin Herring, I think, a lot on the Holman ones.
Yeah.
Because Griffin Herring, really, you always kind of forget about him.
I know.
That's almost ironic because I forget the kid's name, but his high school teammate is at Duke, and everybody forgot about him because of Herring, and now he's at Duke tearing it up.
Awesome. Yeah, that was the one guy I didn't lump into the bullpen stat of Ackenhausen, Guidry, and Coleman. But and against Tennessee, he goes gauge jump, lefty, Tennessee had struggled on specifically game ones and sometimes against lefties. And then Holman goes game 2 up against Molina, or not Molina, Beam. So like you matched SP1 there.
Yeah. Well, Beam, they've kind of moved Beam around. He was the number 2 to start the season, but their number 1 they moved out, but they left Beam as the number 2. So it's kind of a weird situation where it's really kind of tough to gauge what Tony V's doing with True Beam.
Yeah, I mean that's also a credit to Tony V too, like because they've had a couple of arm injuries in that rotation as well. Because AJ Russell still came back a little bit and then he's been out again. So
and then the whole Burns situation. I know he's at Wake, but again, if you're planning 2-3 years down the road, you envision somebody like him in a Friday night role. So that is something that you have to kind of take into account.
Yeah. So I mean, we talked about the defending national champions. Let's go to the runner-up. Florida, currently 18-17 overall, 7-8 in the SEC. They're tied for 5th in the SEC East. They're 10th out of 14 overall in the conference. The thing to me with Florida, just watching this team, I feel like a little bit more than others. Controlling the strike zone on both sides of the ball is a large issue for the Gators, both on the mound and in the batter's box. We're talking about starting pitching. They've struggled to throw consistent strikes. Jack Caglione walks 6.6 per 9. Liam Peterson.
I mean, you knew what you were getting with him. Like, that was his thing last year.
And then in the preseason, they're all like, he changed his arm slot. Like, he's going to be able to fix the accuracy issues. That hasn't been the case this year. Liam Peterson walking 4.5 per 9. Cade Fisher, 4 per 9. Brandon Neely, who's now slotted into that game 1 starting role, 4.4 per 9.
That's a horrible spot for him, by the way. I know I'm going to kind of go on a rant. They need somebody else like McNeely, Cade Fisher to step up, because Neely is like perfect in a 6, 7, 8 Friday and Sunday. Yeah. And kind of like Evan Ostenbach at A&M. Like, I think that's kind of his role. But again, he's kind of a one-order guy, and he has really, really electric stuff, and he throws it all out there. That's the thing that's kind of weird, is he doesn't feel like a starting pitcher. But they need McNeely to really kind of step up, because again, they're not going to move Cags out of that Sunday role. He's a two-way guy. I know that there's a lot of times where maybe moving up somebody like him. You don't want him to hit the next day at first instead of doing arm workouts. Yeah. Like, that one's a very real thing that he's going to stay in the Sunday role.
I feel like you're saying McNeely. I feel like Fisher was the guy. He just had a slow start. Yeah. He's figured it out in the pen. So maybe he feels more comfortable in a lesser inning appetite in the back end during pivotal points in a game in the bullpen. But yeah, like, I feel like Fisher might be the best option they've got there. Offensively, Florida, they have the second worst batting average in the SEC. That directly correlates, in my opinion, to having the second most strikeouts in the conference offensively. The Gators are only better than Missouri in both categories, who they were just swept by 2 weekends ago. And historically, Missouri is just not good company to be.
I mean, Missouri's going to be good in a few years. I really like their coach and the kind of guys that they brought in. But, I mean, they graduated a lot off of a team that was really struggling. But yeah, I mean, I know that you said it's not going to be they have so much talent, they'll figure it out. But like, if you look up and down it, like, they have so many guys, like Cade Curlin is hitting like under 250 in SEC play. He's too talented. He just needs to kind of shorten up his approach. Brody Donay, the Virginia Tech transfer, he's going to get a lot more at bats, as Tanner Garrison had that injury. Going forward, I don't think he's necessarily earned those at bats. No. He is a ton. He really struggles, which is kind of crazy, because the only time I've ever seen him was when Virginia Tech played at Florida State, and he hit like 3 home runs and went 7 for 8 in the 3 games or something stupid like that. So I've been really high on Brody Donay. I think Brody Donay has the approach, and I think he just needs more at bats. But again, there was a reason. A, he wasn't playing at Virginia Tech the entire year. Gary Giebel was getting at bats. B, there's a reason he transferred. But again, Luke Heyman's got to take better at bats. Shelnutt's got to take better at bats. Because again, Jack Caglione eventually isn't going to homer in 6 straight games forever. Like,
and that's the
he's
thing.
Human. He's going to slump. And that's the part that really struggles me.
He's red hot and they're losing. Yeah. So like, when he slumps or just isn't red hot,
like he is with pitching, like he was good to start the year pitching, and he's kind of not necessarily in a slump, but he's going to go 3 for 10 in a weekend. Like, he's human. But
Yeah.
Ty Evans is the other one that's really going to do it. But again, I think Heyman. I expected Heyman. Tyler Shelnut, he's another one that I really kind of expected to come in. Colby Shelton, he's really kind of a high energy guy who does douchebag things in a good way. But, when you're losing 5 of 6 in the SEC, like that starts to kind of – I just want Florida to kind of get the edge back that they had earlier in the year. That even though they were losing midweeks, they flushed it, kind of came out with better approaches on weekends. Because, again, that A&M series was like a true masterclass of, I think, everything that Florida baseball stands for. Friday night, you don't get the start that you want. You grind it out, get 6 innings out of your starter. McNeely slams the door shut with 3 innings. Approach-wise, they lived and died by the long ball. But, again, they were taking really, really competitive at-bats. They had a ton of hard contact. I mean, they chased Prager in, like, the 3rd inning. And I think he's
that's like
the last
Prager's
2 weeks.
Start.
Yeah, like the last 2 weeks he hasn't walked somebody. Thursday or Friday he complete game 10 Ks. And I was talking with one of the Vandy coaches after the game, and he was like, yeah, he pounds the zone. He does a really good job of making you chase because he's going to be in the zone. So when he isn't in the zone, it's like a little bit of a surprise. But again, so Vandy Florida had really good at bats that weekend against Texas A&M, and I don't know what switch has flipped, but again, South Carolina is historically under Kingston been a terrible, terrible road team. They're one of the best teams in the SEC at home, but they really struggle on the road, and they kind of took Florida behind the woodshed and whipped them up.
Yeah. Offensively, both game 1 and game 2.
Yeah.
The first one was, I think, close. They dressed it up in the 9th.
I think Cags had which I wouldn't say he's famous for that because he hits home runs a lot, but there's been a lot of sad Jack Caglione home runs because Florida's losing bad, and that's kind of what we saw on Saturday. I think
it didn't quite happen against Florida State, but I mean he goes deep in the 1st inning, and then Florida State goes and scores 19 runs or whatever it was in the midweek.
Yeah, like ironically, like when he broke Wyatt's record, it was in a 15-0 run roll in the top of the 7th with 1 out.
My prediction, I guess, on the Gators here, I'll go with this. Like, they kind of did. They had this formula that I feel like I don't really believe in. The gorilla ball, swing for the fences. We're not going to hit for average. They went to the final last year. Like, so I have a feeling that Sully's going to be able to figure this thing out. And this might be like they lose in the first and they lose in the regional team this year. Like, because you'll get a year like that with Florida. I feel like they'll be able to turn it around. They lose early in the postseason. That's my prediction of Florida.
They'll likely go either to Florida State or to Duke, so they're going to be in a bad matchup regardless. I mean,
just any of those Carolina schools on the ACC, they're all legit. So I feel like this is not a team that wants to see, any of those power hitting lineups in the Carolinas.
I mean, they can figure it out, but I mean, this is a team that has had just about as bad of a 2-week stretch as you can see. They went from being a
6th or 4th,
super regional host that everybody bitches about to probably out of terminated right the second they'd be out.
Yeah, they're 1 game above 500 overall.
Yeah, like they don't win in midweeks. They don't, and now they're starting to not win in
ugly
SEC
losses.
Play. Yeah,
now you're on the bubble. Those are ugly losses that are going to be held against you.
Yeah, let me see what they are. Yeah, they're 2-5 in the 51 to 100 RPI and 3-7 against the top 25. Like, that's not a good and 2 of those are against A&M at home.
Their RPI right now is 43rd. So they are on the bubble firmly.
I mean, they played a tough schedule, I will say.
So real quick, we'll go into your area. Before we hit on the Big 12, I mean, Oral Roberts was a Final Four team. You kind of, I guess, pushed back on me for including them here because I feel like a lot of people that cover it, follow Oral Roberts, expected a little bit of a step back. But I just wanted to hit on them because anybody that's jumping into the sport after, kind of the big sporting events here, casual college baseball fans jumping in the middle of the season, Oral Roberts is 12-23 overall. They're 4-10-1 in the Summit League. This is a team that won back-to-back Summit League championships back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances. Last year, they go to the College World Series. They just lost a lot from that team, and it was kind of to be expected, right, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, Jonah Cox left. They had a ton of guys transfer out. That was kind of their whole thing, is it was like a last ride. But they sit at 4-10 in a bad league. Like, there's not a
Yes.
team over 500 in that league, in the Summit
No.
League. And yeah, they went back to back. And honestly, I believe 21 was when Omaha went and they upset Oral Roberts. They very easily could have been like a DBU type. But again, I wouldn't say that this was to be expected that they would bottom out, be 4-10 in a conference, because again, this is just such a bad conference. Omaha's 10-22, Northern Colorado's 7-27. A lot of people said they're the worst team in college baseball, and they sit above Oral Roberts. Oral Roberts, has a culture of, hey, you didn't make the Power 5 team, you got a little chip on your shoulder, come here. Get indoctrinated into a weird Christian school and go play baseball. But they're not a team. They're a team that I'd want to see in a regional. They're not a good team
because
right now.
they still have some of the pieces on the mound from that Omaha team.
Yeah.
So they have somewhat of a DNA to go out and win 2 on a weekend. The stringing together like a 4 or 5, if you lose a game in a regional, might not be Oral Roberts, but they could go out and they could win 2, and then they can maybe put together a good offensive day in the regional final.
It's uphill sledding for them too. I mean, if they don't get a good start, they really kind of get into a bullpen issues really fast. Like,
yeah,
I know they got in a shootout with Omaha a few weeks ago where it was like 19-14 or something like that. Which again, if you're playing in those type of games, it's the no pitching more than the good hitting. I don't think that they're going to do a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mentioned we'll hit on ORU before the Big 12. We've arrived. The final 4 team that we'll talk about from last year's Omaha, that you were there live for, TCU. They're 22-12 overall. This team's really confusing. They're undefeated in the non-conference. They have 12 Big 12 losses. They're 6-12. They're 11th in the conference. I feel like you've experienced this firsthand because a lot of that team returned. They lost a couple of leaders, I would say, that were seniors or juniors that were drafted, but a big part of that core is back.
Yeah, I mean, Braden Taylor was obviously far and away their best player from a draft standpoint. He went in the 15th round. I mean, not the 15th round. He went 15 overall, I believe. But they had a lot of guys that, when they were struggling, like Nunez, Austin Davis, Trey Richardson, that, could bunt somebody on and steal a base and you're right back in the game. They don't really have that this year. They have a lot of guys like Carson Bowen and Luke Boyers who are better hitters in my eyes, but when they're not hitting, they're not going to luck their way into base hits. Ryder Robinson, he's a freshman that Charles was really, really high on. He's obviously having freshman moments. Brody Green was a guy who was kind of in and out of the lineup. I think he's kind of firmly found himself out. And then the pitching staff. I mean, Cole Klecker, I think, has been moved out to the bullpen. He was the Friday guy last year, but they brought in Peyton Tolley, who was supposed to be a two-way guy. So they had him as the Friday night guy so he could hit later. Obviously, his bat, I think he's hitting like 220, so I don't think he's getting at bats anymore.
He's like a bench bat, bring him in
but if he
needs some pop.
He's been every bit of a Friday night guy, and Klecker's 100%. The one that's really kind of struggled. But again, Klecker had, I don't think he had like an arm injury. I think it was more arm fatigue. But him, Ben Abelt, I think is really kind of taken a step back. Yep. But they're a team where I mean, they did it last year. I mean, they didn't bottom out as low as they did last year. They were kind of almost like Florida, where they were like kind of average. Everybody couldn't get a feel on them. And then they lost 6. They got swept back to back, and they were kind of like dead to rights. But, they figured it out last year. There's no reason to believe that they can't figure it out this year. Yeah. You mentioned the A&M parallels. A&M kind of figured it out in that kind of May window. But again, I think you need somebody to kind of step up and be a leader on this team. And I think looking around, I mean, it was supposed to be Silva, but at the end of the day, like he's, 5, 6, 7 hole bat. Like he's not going to be
Yeah.
the guy that bangs out 20, 25 home runs. That's just not him. He's more likely to, steal a ball in the hole that gets you out of the inning. Everybody gets super electric, then hit the go-ahead home run. But you mentioned the non-conference slate. They should have lost a lot of those games.
Yeah, they were due for regression. We were calling for regression. I didn't expect this to completely bottom out in the Big 12. You also called back to like us discussing pre-show Texas A&M and TCU, which for the listeners, I mean, Jake and I were sitting here for 85 minutes talking pre-show. I do that with a lot of guests just to, kind of break ice and get to know them well. But like, I mean, we just got into a roll. I will say, like, so with TCU last year, they started off great in non-con. They were not expected to be tremendous.
Well, they did lose to Florida State. They did lose Florida State non-conference at home. That ended up being a terrible loss.
Arlington, though, like Arlington, they played pretty well. I think they went 2-1. They lost to Missouri.
Missouri won that tournament. That was the weirdest thing.
But they beat Arkansas, so it was like, okay, this team is something to remember. They turned it on late. They went like 24-2 up until their couple of losses in Omaha. Like, so my read on this TCU team is the offense has gone extremely cold in conference play. Outside of the Big 12, they're 16-0. However, against Big 12 pitching, this offense hasn't been able to do anything. They're the second worst batting average in the Big 12 with a 268. They're tied for the least home runs in the conference, which that's a given. They play in a big park in Lupton. But if you're not hitting for average or power, that's going to be the reason why you're in the basement of a conference. So it's not like they're striking out a ton either. As a collective, only 252. That's the second least.
They have a lot of weak contact. Like when you watch them play, it's a lot of lazy flyouts, lots of shortstop, fields ball type of things. But I mean, they have to figure it out. Like
that's where I'm at right now.
The Big 12A. I mean, they play Texas this weekend. And Texas, I'm sure we'll segue about them later. This is a winnable series for them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge one.
They can, they're running out of time, but there's a ton of winnable games left on their schedule.
For sure. With TCU, I feel like they can easily do what they did last year, where they slumped in the middle. I know 11.7 and Bet Upton have like their hot, cold, hot theory. And TCU fit the formula perfect last year. This year, it kind of looks like they do again. You were kind of hinting that you feel the same, that TCU is going to figure it out, be a 2 seed kind of in the NCAA tournament. Feel like?
I think even if were they a 2 or a 3 last year?
I think they were a 2 last year. They won the Big 12 tournament and then they got the 2.
I still vividly remember. I was talking with my boss who went to TCU when they lost that Thursday game against Kansas State. And I was like, they're out. They're going to miss the tournament. And then they won every single game for like the next month and ended up in Omaha. Arizona was the 3, I think. Yeah, they were the 2.
Which they completely backdoored their way in from a conference tournament too.
Yeah, they were. I think they figured out. They'll likely have to go out west, which the pack, the Big West, is just such an anomaly this year because they're like all those teams are just beating up on each other. So you don't know if it's because they're all like really good and underrated and figuring stuff out and beating up on each other, or if it's all just like really bad baseball. But that whole section of the country, like west of New Mexico, like is just such an anomaly with college baseball. Like, Oregon State's good, but like, do you fear somebody like Irvine? Do you fear somebody like Santa Barbara? Because again, Santa Barbara lost to Campbell, and Campbell's like 6th in their conference.
Yeah, middle of the pack in the CAA. I am fascinated by the Big West. I'm happy that you brought that up because that's weird. Jumbled. It is jumbled.
Hawaii's pretty like Hawaii has that weird thing where it's so hard to go play there.
Yeah.
Because I went on a recruiting visit there like 10 years ago. And it's like all misty and the ball doesn't travel as far. So it really, and then, from a sleep standpoint, your sleep schedule kind of gets messed up because, you're starting games in your body, 10:30. Yeah. So it's a weird place to go in and play. And again, Ole Miss really struggled. They went out there and split.
2-2.
NC State took care of business, but again, the Big West is just such a weird conference. San Diego can't go to the postseason, but they just beat the best team.
I know. I was on that too. I had them winning that Friday, and then I picked them to win the series. So dream scenario, we get a Fayetteville regional rematch. Can we get TCU shoved into Fayetteville?
That one's going to be tough because like the committee this year is really going to struggle because the SEC and ACC are the best teams. They're in the Southeast. The Big 12 is going to get a little bit weird because I think it's, a lot of those teams that we're seeing now that have high RPIs like Baylor, they're going to fall. So the Sun Belt is another premier one.
Benefit though, because the Pac-12 isn't as strong this year. So I feel like even though the Big 12 is down, they might still get 5 or 6.
I mean, it's Oregon, Oregon State, Arizona's won 11 in a row. But
like Utah.
Yeah, the fighting Gary Hendersons. I still don't know how good I know they played Oregon State. I don't know that they played Oregon State tough because the game was on TV. Like, I assume that they played them tough because they were live tweeting the scores.
Oregon State's kind of playing with their food too. They lose to USC. They lost the game 3 to Stanford. They were tight.
They're still kind of getting healthy though. They lost their Friday night guy. I think this is his second or third week back coming up.
They're like, you just look up and down that lineup and you're like, oh, that guy's missed some games. This guy's missed some games. Caraway is still out. So
they still have Turley. They still have Pizzana.
They're so good.
But again, I hate if there's any Oregon State fans, they're probably going to get PTSD. Some struggling SEC team's going to go out there and give them hell, like they always do.
Like Auburn 2 years ago.
Auburn, LSU went out there and I think played them really tough. They always get paired up with some like the 8th or 9th best SEC team that had to grind to get there. So I mean, that's the only thing about them going to Fayetteville is they sent Texas and they sent A&M out west. I think that's gonna be the thing that I would love to see. I mean, they love storylines though. So do you send them to College Station because A&M? This is the second year in a row A&M and TCU have played in a tournament that they didn't play each other, which by the way is just I don't know anything about that, but it's just kind of a weird thing to point out that they were in Houston, 23 didn't play. They had their own unique formula for that third weekend in Dallas. So the committee always loves to kind of do that, but now it's like Arkansas, Oklahoma State, TCU, A&M, they're all kind of like connected in a way, which again, Oklahoma State's kind of playing their way into a regional conversation here.
I think that's my favorite Big 12 team right now.
They still kind of have the injury bug a little bit.
They got Schubert back 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, didn't he get hit like the nuts or something like that? And that was like his why he
very
was
similar
injured.
to Wyatt Langford last year.
Yeah, Wolford. I think Wolford has the shoulder issue. Who he was a Big 12 newcomer last year as a transfer from a JUCO. He's really, really talented. So it's weird because Sam Garcia and Holiday kind of said this the first game that Sam Garcia was better than his numbers kind of appeared, and that's why Josh Holiday makes the big bucks because he is every bit of a Friday night guy. He's probably in the Big 12 Pitcher of the Year conversation.
And Brian Holiday had started out lights on fire or house on fire in the beginning of the year too. Like he's solid as well.
There's no relation, by the way, and a lot of people kind of ask about that. They're spelled a little bit differently. Yeah. They don't look anything alike. I've talked to both Coach Holiday and him in post games. They're not related in any sense of the word. Awesome. But again, I really like Oklahoma State. I wrote a little piece on it.
Me too.
About 2-3 weeks ago about how I think that they're going to be the one that kind of breaks out here. I think that Oklahoma State's going to be the legit Big 12 team. So it's kind of weird it's going to be weird to see how A&M and Arkansas will likely both be top 5. TCU, depending on how it falls, TCU, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas to some extent. Those are going to kind of be who goes to the storylines that they always chase.
Which pre-show you wanted to throw Texas into the mix. So we kind of danced around the Longhorns a little bit while we were talking about the Big 12 here. You were also talking about draw. That's something that I brought up, like kind of, in our DM when we were prepping for the show. Like, to me, Texas, I just feel like they're going to figure it out. They'll be a back half if they really heat up. They'll be a back half top 16. They'll probably be a 2. They get a good draw. Last year they went to Miami. They went and won against Miami, who I didn't think was very great. I just think teams are going to shit themselves when they see Texas coming to their ballpark. They've got other distractions lineup, when they're being the host.
If they can get into the right kind of ballpark, they can be. I mean, they scored 9 runs in the 9th inning against a Houston team that has, according to Kansas State's coach, the deepest bullpen in the Big 12.
Really?
That's what he said. It kind of caught me off guard a little bit too. I didn't necessarily see it, but he's got advanced scouting that I don't have. But again, Peyton Powell takes good at bats. Jared Thomas takes tremendous at bats. Schussler and Galvan, who kind of go back and forth between catcher and DH, they are both mature college hitters. And then Ballou and Gasparino are 2 kind of stud freshmen. Jalen Flores is having just a renaissance of a year. But, their bullpen issues, it's one of those things where I don't envy David Pierce at all. They have a ton of supremely talented bullpen guys. Gage Bohm, Ace Whitehead's kind of more of a starter now. Heston Tolley has really good breaking stuff, but you don't know what you're going to get from them. And it's one of those things too where Pierce has kind of figured it out. After like the second batter if this guy's got it or not. It's not one of those ones where it's like, oh, we left the guy in too long and we thought he could pitch a few more. Like, instantly if somebody's going to get rocked. And Pierce does a good job about going and getting him out. But again, this weekend it was Gage Bohm. But Gage Bohm was really good in Houston. Pierce talked about how great he was. And the next week he kind of took a step back. So, I mean, with this Texas bullpen, it really does kind of feel like 1 step forward, 2 step back, that it's a balancing act of which Heston Tolley are we going to get? Which Gage Bohm are we going to get? And then LeBaron Johnson, I mean, just his, not necessarily regression, but as people have started to scout him a little bit more, his pitch count has gotten really, really high, really fast, which again, yesterday he worked into the 4th inning. I think he threw 70 pitches, and around that 40-50 mark is where he really kind of started to tire as, you blink and Houston scored 4 runs, had the bases loaded, ready to blow the game up. And, if that would have happened in the 5th or 6th, like we're talking about a different LeBaron Johnson start, but it happened in the 3rd because he really kind of played with his food a little bit. Like he's a big strikeout guy. Guys take long at bats with him. So that's going to be the one thing that, I really kind of challenge somebody like LeBaron Johnson is, can he make those 4 innings, 60 pitches, 5, 6, 70 pitches? Because again, he's good around until he gets to about 50 pitches. It's just teams wait him out for so long, knowing, hey, he's either going to walk us to death or we're going to be able to go on the offensive because he's going to start leaving his splitter up a little bit. So I mean, it's an interesting debate.
And you mentioned so it doesn't really, my statement that I'm about to make doesn't really back him up because he pitched against BYU just recently, but this is his 3rd time going through the Big 12. So the scouting report has gotten a little bit better against him. So I like the point that you make there, but again, ultimately kind of how I started it off, I'm still a believer in Texas. You kind of have to be with the pedigree of the program. They're not out of the NCAA tournament picture by any means. The Big 12 is still going to be plenty more crazy. The final 5 weeks of the season.
I should say this. I hate, say, oh, trust coaches, but David Pierce has been on just an unreal run post-COVID of guys that not necessarily were island of misfit toys, but like Murphy Staley wasn't highly recruited. Jared Thomas, Jack O'Dowd last year, he was a Vandy kind of washout. Peyton Powell is, a 5th-year senior on his last run. Like for a program that is as high up as Texas is, you wouldn't expect them to have a lot of guys who are 4th, 5th-year guys. And I think that really is just a credit to the program that David Pierce has built, that they have guys who not necessarily are going to play at the next level, but are just tremendous experienced college bats. And
I like that point a lot.
Yeah, I mean, they're an old team in a good way. I mean, they have Flores, who's a sophomore. They have Gasparino, but again, Gasparino's dad is a hitting coach with the Dodgers. Like, he is beyond his years. His swing, even in just a month and a half, because I saw him in the first week of March and I saw him yesterday, his swing is just so much shorter, more fluid now. He takes better at bats. And again, that's just something I think with the timing that a lot of their older guys are really, really starting to get good experience. And, there's a lot of guys. It really is kind of a fight at the bat rack with Texas.
It's an awesome just dialect I don't know if I put that correctly, just into the team because I mean, personally, I don't know individual players as much as I do just kind of teams overall, at just handicapping teams and games. But I love a lot of that information there. I had mentioned kind of the draw that Texas kind of gets in the NCAA tournament. They had Miami last year. I want to jump into Miami here, who's 16 and 19 overall. They're 6 and 12. They're sixth in the ACC Coastal, 12th overall in the ACC. The word here for Miami that I want to use is just inconsistency. And I guess in year one with new head coach JD Ortega, you can kind of live with that a little bit. The Canes parted with Gino
But
at the end of the
he's been
year.
there for like 20 years.
I know he's been the assistant under him. So like
he was the assistant to the assistant, then he was the assistant.
And he was able to keep a lot of these guys from jumping in the portal. I really like some of the individual pieces on this team. The rotation with Gage Zeal, he's really reached another level lately. Rafe Schlesinger is a funky lefty that I love. He's hard to hit if you don't prepare right. Herrick Hernandez, one of the better Sunday starters in the ACC. And then offensively, the Canes have Jason Torres, Daniel Cuvée, who are playing out of their minds with 1,000+ OPSs. Blake Sears taken a slight step back from his stellar freshman year, but
he's been coming on too. He was hitting like 220 at the start of ACC play.
When I look at Miami, it's just confusing because they've played in multiple different styles of baseball games, so they don't really have one formula of like, okay, so this game happened like this. This is where it went kind of wrong, because they'll be in firefests because of some pitching issues. Their offense scores double-digit runs, and then they'll be in some low-scoring pitching duels because just the offense didn't show up that day. What's your kind of read on the Canes here?
I mean, they're great at home. I think that the Clemson series, I think it was like Canes Cat, which shout out to him. He's another kind of great insider. He had said that they hadn't lost a home series in like 5 years or something crazy like that. So they're really, really great at home. Like they beat Virginia at home. They just they're terrible on the road. Like they lost
to
Notre Dame.
2-11.
Yeah, like I mean, I saw this Notre Dame team when they played at Rice. They don't really have a pitching staff, but again, with Miami, they remind me a lot of Virginia Tech last year, where Zeal and Rafe, they're going to throw 8 innings. They throw 8 innings, give up 6 runs. That's going to be what they do. If they throw 8 innings, give up 1 run, that's going to be like they truly have nobody reliable outside of those two, which is kind of ironic because JD Ortega made his living as a pitching coach. But again, they're a spoiler team. I don't think that they're necessarily they remind me a ton of like Georgia Tech this year, where they have the talent to beat anybody at home in Miami. And then, but they can lose to anybody on the road. Zeal 2 weeks ago was ACC Pitcher of the Week, pitched phenomenal. And then last weekend they chased him in the 4th inning. It's weird though, because you expect Miami to have a lot more talent than they have.
Yeah.
But like, if you kind of do a deep dive look at them, and it's like, okay, they like Lucas Costello, there's a reason he's not at Wake Forest. There's a lot of guys like that. And again, Blake Sear, it's like, okay, sophomore slumps are very common across the sport. But I mean, Cuvée, he's been a really, really breath of fresh air. He takes tremendous at bats. He's, he has a very professional approach. He loves kind of going the opposite way. But again, Miami is a team where they're going to be on that bubble with Georgia Tech, Auburn, LSU, but unfortunately they're going to have to go on the road, and it's probably going to end very quickly for them.
So here's where I think I like Miami a little bit more than kind of the bubbly ACC teams. I think they have a really good DNA, especially starting rotation. So I'm going to say this. I think that benefits them with more games under the belt. Ortega gets more comfortable just at the helm here. Miami, you said spoiler. Miami, I think, is the high digit seed in the ACC tournament that could make something happen. They win the 2 games in their pool. They go to the semis, and then we'll see where it takes them from there. That's kind of where I have this Miami team pegged.
Yeah, and honestly, I use the running back theory when Monty and I were talking about it, who Monty runs our ACC stuff, of like, there's only a finite number of, I mean, unless you're Quinn Matthews and you're just a student of the game at a Stanford-esque level. You have a tremendous understanding of your body. Like, there's finite number of innings that you have and pitches. So, Rafe and Zeal going 8-9 innings, 100 pitches every night. Like, I just worry. And again, I don't know these kids. I'm not around them like Ortega is. I'm not going to pretend to be a Miami insider, but I worry about the fatigue on their arms going forward and getting into ACC play, because they are going to be rushed back in ACC play. They are going to be rushed back if they make it to a tournament. That's the thing that really kind of worries me about Miami. Is, I mean, Hernandez can kind of come in at times, but it's Zeal and Schussler. They're like up here. I mean, they're two of the best pitchers in the ACC, truly. That's the thing that really worries me about them. And then they just get so streaky at the plate, where like you'll blink and they haven't had a hit in 3 or 4 innings. They're 5 through 9s, 0 for combined. I mean, Lucas Costello's figured it out a little bit more. Blake Sears kind of starting to figure it out a little bit more. So, is this one of those things where they're returning to their mean, or, they're playing above their weight class? That's going to be the one thing to kind of track, is how they kind of their bottom of the order guys kind of go through. Because again, there's a lot of unknown about this Miami team.
Yeah.
And they're young. They're a young team.
So do you think they kind of turn this thing around? Where do you kind of see their season ending here?
I don't necessarily think they regress or turn it around. I think that this is kind of what you're going to get from Miami. You're going to get a team that at home is going to take 2 of 3, and then on the road they'll likely get swept. I mean, they play Louisville at home. I really like them in that series. Georgia Tech, again, I don't know which Georgia Tech we're going to see. Yeah. They're not going to beat Virginia Tech on the road. Pitt, I didn't realize actually how light their schedule is down the stretch. They actually have a very winnable schedule down the stretch. As again, Georgia Tech has their freshman moments with them, and that's kind of really their only tough. I don't think they beat Virginia Tech, but I don't think anybody expects them to. So I think that that's going to be. I think that they're just going to be what they are, and it's a 8 to 12 ACC team. Like, they're not as bad as Notre Dame and Pitt. They're just an 8 to 12 ACC team.
I like it. Real quick, I'll zoom by this, because they're kind of coming out of that valley, but they were in it for sure. I feel like the Virginia Tech series that you mentioned was the turning point for Wake Forest. Currently, they're 9-9 in the ACC, 24-11. They got Nick Kurtz back from injury, and even before he was hurt, he kind of just was not.
He had a nagging injury though before. I should clarify that. There was, I think, like 2 weeks. I had heard an insider's
he had a slow
report.
start, so it makes sense then.
Well, he was injured last year, remember?
Yeah, he had the rib, and it bothered him all the way
I think
up.
I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I had heard like 2 weeks before he went out, like a rumor that he was injured, but it was a nagging injury. So I think that he just kind of needed to rest a little bit. But again, Wake Forest, I think, is rolling right now.
Yes.
And I'll steal from my co-host.
He's got 11 bombs in their last 9 games too.
I'll steal the phrase from, I think it was Noah that said it, that a lot of these teams that got Wake Forest early, like Virginia, Duke to some extent, they're going to be glad.
Their schedule
they're going to be glad
early.
They got him there, and they swept Virginia Tech. They really had a chance to sweep Boston College on marathon weekend. I mean, they play Florida State. They get a lot of chances to add on here. Yeah. Notre Dame.
Well, BC actually had a walk-off in that series, so they won that one 2-1. But yeah, like I totally agree, and specifically
I think they blew it too. Like I think they blew it late. Like they were up in the 8th or 7th or 8th, and then they blew it.
BC,
if I remember correctly,
they had a walk-off bomb. It was just like that. But yeah, like I remember looking at the preseason, their schedule was much tougher early on, and then they get Clemson at the end, but it was like stacked early. Let's switch over to the Pac-12 here. We'll go back to another team that was in Omaha with you in Stanford. This was another team that was, if you follow college baseball, an expected step back. They're kind of where we thought they were going to be. They're in the mix in the Pac-12. They're currently 6th. They're 7-8. They stole game 3 from Oregon State. But they're 14-19 overall because they really struggled early. Lost some bad non-conference games, but David Esker is one of the best at the business. Like, this is a Stanford team that they're going to be ruining a couple of, like, we're already talking about a Pac-12 that is quite bad, but they're going to be ruining some resumes here coming down the stretch because they are getting better.
I'm gonna be honest. I mean, Stanford, the last 3 years they've gone to Omaha, and I think in 2 of those 3 they haven't been competitive. But again, they were one of the Final 8 teams.
Yeah, they went 0-2 2 years in a row, or 3
I have been
years
checked out of Stanford like long ago. Like Noah made it his upset prediction early on that Penn State was going to beat Stanford.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I've been truly kind of checked out on Stanford. They graduated a ton. Tommy Troy.
They
Braden
lost like
Montgomery.
6 or 7 of the lineup pieces from last year. And yeah, the team, I guess we can move a little bit. The team that I've been checked out on in the Pac-12 this year is UCLA. Like, their program, they always have to show it to me for me to be able to believe in them each year, because John Savage brings in so many of these young recruiting classes. But ever since COVID, youth has just not been the way to go in college sports
too. That's
really.
the other thing.
And that's the other thing. Like, Thatcher Hurd and Cage Jump, you were supposed to build your program around the potential aces, and they just get picked away by the transfer portal, however that be. Both of them, they hopped over to LSU. That really stunts your program's growth. And I didn't expect them to bottom out completely in the Pac-12, but currently they are 13-20 overall, 6-12, which is last in the Pac-12. I mean, the Bruins are in a rough spot.
They we did a panic button meter on Saturday, and I'd said that UCLA is in a panic button, but for a different reason than I think LSU is, because I mean, no one expected them to kind of compete and go to Omaha. No one expected them to really push Oregon State, but they're quickly falling into irrelevancy like USC has done. Because I mean, I'm
And
25
they're going to
years
the Big
old.
Ten next year.
Yeah, USC has never been good in my life.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we did a trivia show like in the summer to kind of do content, and that was when I kind of realized that USC was this dominant force. Because you look, it's like USC, but they're utterly irrelevant in modern college baseball.
In the 2000s,
I think UCLA is truly in danger of doing that. And again, there's a lot. I mean, here's the part that's so weird, and I hate to kind of. I mean, obviously, I get to see A&M a lot, so I get to see a lot. But like,
I'm fascinated by this, by the way.
Hayden Schott, Cali kid. Ted Burton, Huntington Beach, Cali kid. Like, I'm glad they're at Texas A&M and they're graduate transfers from smaller schools, but there's no reason guys like that, if they have a place to go that's good in SoCal, that they wouldn't go home. Like Jackson Appel's from Houston, he returned home. Dylan Rock's from Houston, he returned home. There's no reason that somebody like Hayden Schott or Ted Burton, if they had a place to go on the West Coast, would stay there. Thatcher Hurd, if UCLA is competing, he's staying there. There's a lot of guys that need a home. And again, we saw it in football with USC and UCLA, where the Bryce Youngs, the DJ Ugalagalehi, Bryce Young to some extent, Tua Tagovailoa, that if they had this place to go on the West Coast, that they would stay there. And I think that's the problem, is all these good West Coast baseball players are leaving. I mean, Ali Camarillo, he's a SoCal kid. He's from Chula Vista. If UCLA is in the hunt, he's one of the best shortstops in the SEC. He would start and instantly make a school like UCLA better. I think that's the part that's kind of scary about UCLA is, I mean, like I remember when they had, Bauer, Cole, they had a ton of Brandon Crawford.
It wasn't too long ago. It was just last decade, I'm really fascinated by this conversation. I want to continue it. For those like at home, we had Iowa and Maryland left on this list that we're not going to get to today. Those also
I do want to say, I want to apologize
for
Iowa. I was very high on Iowa. I had them at 6.
Nationally?
Nationally, I had them at 6. I mean, on paper, Brady Breck's front line start. I think I saw him at 19. He was supposed to take
Marcus Morgan, even worse, like 7.23 ERA, walking 8.2 per 9. Like he was runner-up for the Big Ten Pitcher of the Year last year.
That was always my common talking point, is that Iowa's so good that Brady Breck's the Saturday guy, because Marcus Morgan really is a talented college pitcher because he pounded the zone. I forget the kid's name, Oberholster or
Obermueller. Yeah,
Obermueller. He was supposed to be a good Sunday guy, and
he's starting on Fridays.
they flopped in Jacksonville, and that was kind of really the signs that you saw. And then Ole Miss beat them. Which again, Ole Miss is a good team, but like I don't know what Iowa's deal is. Like I really don't.
And then I'll zoom through Maryland, and we'll get back to the UCLA conversation.
They did lose to the worst college baseball team in Power 5 this week.
Maryland, they're 23-14 overall, 5-7 and 7th in the Big Ten. You know, former head coach Rob Vaughn left Maryland for Alabama this past offseason. Assistant Matt Swope steps into the head coaching role. So again, it was kind of like the Miami thing, but there are some cracks in the shield.
And Swope's a good coach. I really like Matt Swope. I think that.
And that was a dream job for him too.
There's some jobs in the country where you're like, you can look at it and you're like, okay, they're making like bonehead decisions, like Bama last year. Like you can kind of see why obviously he gambled on games.
Like they went from Bakich to Vaughn. Like perfect.
Yeah, like there's a ton of guys when you look around the country, you're like, okay, baseball's that's not Matt Swope. Matt Swope is truly one of the best people in college baseball in terms of a coaching staff. I think that, I don't honestly, I know he's a Maryland guy, but Maryland should really be happy that somebody like that is involved with their program. And again, looking
it
flat
sounds like he wants to stay. Yeah. He's passionate about the place too.
Losing at Northwestern is not a way to show your appreciation for your coach.
No.
Like,
but yeah, like they were a team over the last 2 years that had not lost a Big Ten series, and they've now lost against Michigan, Northwestern, and one other team in there too. So
I should say, I know that you're a Michigan guy. I saw Michigan earlier in the year, and granted, they were very, very overmatched as they had Oregon State, Arkansas, and Oklahoma State, but they look like they didn't even belong in the same field as those three teams.
No,
and
they grabbed a lot of transfers this year. So it was kind of expected that we would take some time to kind of mold this thing, but I thought they were going to be a top 5 Big Ten team. They're currently sitting third. Michigan.
Yeah. Michigan's, I think they're a barometer Big Ten team that I would say that they're average. So if the Big Ten's really good, Michigan's kind of going to slide back. Like, if Iowa was playing like they were supposed to, Maryland was playing like they were supposed to, Rutgers, I think Rutgers they would kind of like, they're here, but everybody in the Big 12, but now everybody in the Big 12 is kind of gone like this. So it's like, I think Michigan has the talent to compete against some of the lower tier Big Ten teams. Like there is a clear difference between them and like Minnesota and Michigan State. But again, if you would have told me at the beginning of the year that Iowa would be behind Michigan, I'd be like, oh, I guess Michigan's having a renaissance here.
Yeah. Like me being a Michigan fan, I don't get offended when you say that either. Like we have just other sports that we pump money into. So I think that's totally fair comment to stay. And yeah, I think that's a great viewpoint and cool to get an outsider viewpoint. Now, I'm in Big Ten country. This is my fear for UCLA. Let's get back to this conversation real quick.
Yes, we did get sidetracked.
They are going to jump. Well, I kind of wanted to just slightly hit on the 2 other Big Ten teams that we had. UCLA is going to jump into the Big Ten. I honestly think just by program nature, they're going to be a top 4 team in the Big Ten, like no matter what. But they'll have success when they jump into this conference, but it also is going to say to the athletic department, hey, we don't need to put any more money into the sport because they are doing well in a power conference in the Big Ten, who's going to be a top 2 revenue conference when all of this shit happens in our college sports landscape right now. It is a real fear of mine that, like you said, they just completely fall out of relevancy because they are not putting as much attention and again, resources into baseball.
Just how like the SEC's kind of invested in basketball, some of those Big Ten teams are starting to invest in baseball. Like, right this second, they're clearly behind Rutgers. They're clearly behind Maryland. I think Michigan can turn into a sleeping giant. They're a little bit tough though because a lot of their best players from Michigan kind of leave and go.
Yeah, we've had them disperse all throughout the country.
I forget the kid's name, but there's a guy on Oklahoma State
Nolan Schubert. Yeah.
Yeah, he was committed to Michigan.
That whole Orchard Lake St. Mary's team, Bakich recruited well. And then when he dipped, so Alex Mooney, it went to Duke. Ike Irish, now at Auburn. Nolan Schubert, Oklahoma State. All three of those were high school teammates. That team over the span of 3 years was like 77-1. And
Ike Irish, I said it on the show. He is the best player that unfortunately is stuck at the 14th
Auburn.
best. Yeah, I truly love. He was one of probably. I've seen a lot of really really good college baseball players this year. He's up there in the conversation with Bazana, I think, in every sense of the word.
Good to hear. I really enjoyed this conversation, Jake. Before I let you go, anything else that you wanted to add real quick?
We're kind of getting into the dog days of college baseball. So, we're still going to be doing the weekend rotation for College Baseball Central on Saturdays. We're still going to have Texas content, ACC contents live on Mondays. They have a Best Coast podcast with my buddy Mark, where they kind of take care. That's how I kind of follow all these Pac teams. So there's a ton of college baseball content if you want to follow us. We don't really have a gambling perspective. We're kind of have you do your own kind of, we do the research for you, and then you can kind of make your assumptions on your gambling stuff. But, just come check us out. We got a lot of written articles too as well. But again, we let the gambling stick with the experts like Noah.
Thanks. I was going to allow you. You're a true professional. I was going to allow you to plug a lot of your stuff at the end here. But so you guys recently rebranded too. So I wanted to touch on this at the end as well. Go ahead and plug your socials. So the new account, I feel like a lot of people have followed you over by now,
yes,
but it's college-based
let me get the official one.
It's college-based CNT on Twitter. That's the tag. But go ahead and promote anything.
It's college-based CNT. Mine's right here. Noah Darling is a really good follow. Monty for ACC stuff. If you really want to get connected with ACC stuff. FQ just means less. They're affiliated with us too as well. They do tremendous work. So there's a ton of college baseball content that's free. And then most of us are pretty good about responding to DMs. So, I mean, if you want to ask me about Wright State, Bowling Green, I have a few Bowling Green fans
who've been
in my
texting me
DMs.
about Bowling Green.
I'm working on a feature right now with Bowling Green too as well.
Awesome.
So there's a ton of written content and stuff like that. So, just check us out. And any questions that you have, we're open books.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys do great work. And you have specific people that are really kind of, I don't know, like if beat reporter is the term that you guys go off of, but like there are some people that really, really know their teams that work with you guys. The entire list, every once in a while, Noah tweets it out.
Yeah, he tweets it. I mean, Ashley's great with ECU stuff. Cinderella and AJ are really tremendous with the South Carolina insider knowledge. Sam is tremendous with Tennessee knowledge. I'm pretty connected with A&M in Texas, Houston, Lamar, TCU. So there's a ton of, it's weird because I don't really consider us insiders or beat writers, but the amount of stuff that we get told and we can share is truly, I do kind of thank those schools for giving us the access because I feel like a kid in a candy store going to some of these parks.
That's awesome. I appreciated the time that you spent with just one, the show, but two, with me now. We've been on the same call for about 2 hours plus. I really appreciate it. I had a ton of fun talking to you. I hope a lot of the listeners enjoyed this conversation as well. Again, hit them up because I do think a lot of the information that these guys provide is very valuable, not only just as a college baseball fan, because information's so hard to find, but if you're looking to bet on some of this stuff, information is needed, and these guys do a great job at just providing it. So
I do want to give a gambling disclaimer because one of my friends put 10 teams. There's only 8 that go to Omaha. So if you're betting on teams to go to Omaha, that's not to make the tournament. That's to be the final 8. So we kind of remember that.
Yes. You don't have to worry about that. Like our followers of Sports Gambling Podcast Network, the bigger network of it all. Sean Green, the CEO, the thing that makes this whole network run, co-host of the Sports Gambling Podcast. Last year, his World Series prediction was Phillies against the Cubs. As you know, they're both NL teams, so we can relate on that.
So he's already had 2 of them that will in theory lose, and one of them's LSU, which I told him not to take. So he's got 9 bets for 8 spots.
That is awesome. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you can win a couple of units on just one play, and then you make up for the 5 other.
He got a really good Duke line because I told him like,
Yes.
dude, this Duke team is very, very undervalued. I think he got Duke at like plus 2,000 or something crazy like that.
That is great. Yeah, I knew their price was in the 60s early the first couple of weeks. Then we realized that the offense is really legit, and then that price tanked. So
yeah, I mean Wallace Clark. Monty's gonna get mad at me for talking about Wallace Clark because he's probably one of my favorite, just underrated college baseball players at Duke. He is having a tremendous year. So shout out to Wallace Clark.
Awesome stuff. Thank you for the time, Jake. Have a great night, everybody else that was listening. You've been listening to the College Baseball Experience. You better start thinking about yours. Adios, amigos.